Before the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem about 2,000 years ago, Yom Kippur looked a little different than it does now. Yes, it had all the familiar components that we'd still recognize today: not going to work, fasting, atoning for our sins, and forgiving one another. But back in the day, the central feature was a special temple service conducted only on Yom Kippur by the high priest in the innermost sanctuary of the temple, known as the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. It was a trifecta of holiness, the holiest person in the holiest space at the holiest time of the year. I personally like modern-day Yom Kippur better, less performative, more decentralized, fewer dead goats. But there is one image from this retired ritual that I want us to hold on to this Yom Kippur. Tomorrow, we will read the section from the Torah that explains in detail the special temple service that the high priest performed. And in the Torah's long accounting of that service, it would be easy to miss this one detail, that no other person was allowed in that innermost sanctuary besides the high priest. To do the work of Yom Kippur, the high priest had to enter this space where we are told God's very presence rested, completely alone. Now that the temple is no more, the work of Yom Kippur resides solely on each of us and in each of us. Each of us must metaphorically do what the high priest did literally. Each of us must enter what philosopher Blaise Pascal described as our own chamber. Each of us must turn inwards and encounter our souls and ourselves. As the former chief rabbi of England, Jonathan Sacks, said, like the high priest on this holy day, we face God alone. We confront our mortality alone. Outwardly, we are in the company of others, but inwardly, we are giving a reckoning for our individual life, singular and unique. Judging by the number of people I've talked to who are scared to go out to eat by themselves or to go see a movie by themselves, I'm guessing the task of encountering yourself might land somewhere on the spectrum between uncomfortable and terrifying. But as Brandi Carlile once said, fun fact, she performed right here on this very bima, returning to myself is such a lonely thing to do, but it's the only thing to do. Returning to myself is such a lonely thing to do, but it's the only thing to do. This is the work of Yom Kippur. Teshuvah is the central task of the day. It's often translated as repentance, and people typically associate it with righting wrongs, making amends, repairing damage that we've caused. And all of that is very important and necessary work, but it misses the essence of teshuvah, which literally means to return. The process of teshuvah is actually about returning to oneself, of confronting oneself. It's not limited to only our wrongdoings and all the ways that we fell short this past year. It's about facing ourselves fully and honestly. The theory of change behind this process of teshuvah and why it's connected to repairing harm is that the more connected we are to our true selves, the less harm we will cause out there in the world. That is why during the high holidays, especially, although throughout the year, we are asked to do what's known as cheshbon hanefesh, which literally means an accounting of one's soul. This work is deeply personal and for many of us unfamiliar. But it's not as mystical as it might sound. A simpler translation of cheshbon hanefesh is just introspection. The goal is to understand yourself and who you are at a core soul level. This is obviously easier said than done. How exactly do we encounter ourselves? I think that question is especially challenging in a digital age programmed to steal our attention away from ourselves. The wisdom of Yom Kippur is that the first step in doing this work is removing all the distractions that prevent us from being with ourselves. Yom Kippur goes to extreme measures. We even remove the distraction of eating and drinking, although ironically our hunger pangs and food fantasies end up being their own sort of distraction. But it's not just about food. Yom Kippur is also known as the Shabbat of all Shabbats. And there are many distractions that we remove on Yom Kippur that we're also urged to remove each week on Shabbat. Distractions that include work, shopping, to-do lists, and screens. I'm not particularly interested in debating what should or shouldn't be on some objective distraction list. I'm more interested in your subjective list. What distractions inhibit you from being with yourself? And for the next 24 hours or so, and maybe even for the next several Shabbats afterwards, what might you want to step away from as a first step towards yourself? After removing distractions, the second step in this process of teshuvah, of returning to yourself, is to get in touch with your inner world. For some, that will look like praying. For others, meditating. I personally prefer journaling with a healthy dose of therapy. For some, it will be breath work. It might even involve movement. Each of you can experiment with different modalities, but the end goal is the same for all of us, to get to know ourselves. Now, I am very aware that we are living in a particularly chaotic, scary, and disorienting time. The confusion out there has led to confusion in here. Who am I? What do I actually care about and believe in? What do I want to do with my life? Some of us haven't even had a chance to breathe, let alone ask ourselves these big questions. We are in survival mode, just trying to keep our head above water, to put one foot in front of the other, to get through the day. The demands of keeping a job, of finding a job, of doing what needs to be done, that alone is overwhelming. Encountering one's self is a task that for many of us is too high on Maslow's hierarchy of needs at this moment. The Torah tells us that the ancient Israelites, pressured by the hard labor enforced by their Egyptian taskmasters, could not hear Moses' message that they would be redeemed. Mikotzer ruach ume'avodah kasha, because their breath was short and their labor was harsh. When we can barely withstand the weight of the world, how can we make time for anything other than the immediate tasks that just need to get done? But here's the paradox. The crazier it is out there, the more important it is to be connected to ourselves in here. It's the only way that we are going to make it through this madness, by being centered and grounded. To maintain our balance on this rocky ship, we are going to need to rely on our inner balance. But I don't think that being connected to yourself is just a way to muddle through this dark and difficult moment. I happen to think it may even be a way to transform this moment. There is so much that is so broken in our country right now. But tonight I'll lift up 3 issues that I think many of us are struggling with on an individual level. Loneliness, not knowing when or how to speak up, and political polarization. I think returning to ourselves can help with all 3 of these. Let's start with loneliness, and I realize the idea of being alone sounds like the worst possible solution for loneliness. But there's a difference between being lonely and being alone. And I think our ability to form meaningful connections with others, family, friends, partners, is directly connected to our ability to have a meaningful connection with ourselves. Not only is your relationship with yourself the longest relationship that you will ever be in, it is also prerequisite love, the foundation from which all other love stems. That is why the Torah's commandment to love your neighbor is phrased the way that it is. Love your neighbor as yourself. As Rabbi Isaac ben Moses Aramah, who's known as the Akedat Yitzchak, explains, love your neighbor as yourself teaches that all love is measured against the yardstick of self-love. Time is measured in terms of revolutions of the earth around its own axis. One revolution is a day, and all other measurements of time are fractions of a day. Similarly, he writes, love for one's fellow human is measured by how nearly it equals the love one feels for oneself. For Rabbi Aramah, our capacity to love others is directly proportional to our love of ourselves. If you don't love yourself, you cannot love others. I know that might sound hard to hear, but it makes sense when you think about it. How we treat others is connected to how we treat ourselves. Erich Fromm, nice Jewish psychologist who left Orthodoxy, wrote about 50 years ago in his book, The Art of Loving, respect for one's own self cannot be separated from respect and love and understanding for another individual. The love for my own self is inseparably connected with the love for any other being. It's like how Brandi Carlile finishes that song. Returning to myself is such a lonely thing to do, but then she ends, returning to myself is just returning me to you. For Fromm, our love of others is tied to our love of ourselves. It's all interconnected. And he adds that to love ourselves is to know ourselves. The goal of teshuvah, of returning to yourself, is to better understand yourself, to get in touch with your hopes, your preferences, your desires, your dreams, your fears, your anxieties, your thoughts, your feelings, all of it. I know this is daunting, and it's not going to happen in a single day. Frankly, the process of knowing oneself is a lifelong endeavor. But on this Yom Kippur, I wonder what small daily steps we might take in this direction of self-knowledge and self-love. Returning to yourself won't just help you love yourself and love others. I believe that returning to yourself will also help those of us struggling to find our moral voice in this morally confusing time. We're being told by a lot of loud people with very strong convictions about what is right and wrong, what to say and what not to say, what to do and what not to do. For the people pleasers out there like me, it is very overwhelming. Saying anything is bound to upset someone. It's easier to just stay quiet, to not speak up. I think the task of returning to ourselves changes that calculation of speaking up. It's not about trying to please others or to fit in. Instead, we should be striving to live with integrity. Returning to ourselves is a return to our core values. Instead of judging ourselves for missing some objective or external mark, we can instead judge ourselves for not living up to our own standards. And so the more that we are in touch with our core values, the more we can evaluate ourselves, our actions, and our inactions based on those values. There's a heaviness to Yom Kippur as we confront our mortality, but that is only meant to add weight to this question: what is the life that you want to live? The goal should be to live fully and authentically as you. There's a famous Hasidic story you may have even heard me tell about a man named Zusha. He is on his deathbed weeping. God comes to him and says, Zusha, why are you crying? And Zusha responds, because I know that when I die, you're going to ask me, Zusha, why weren't you more like Moses? And I'm ashamed that I will not be able to give a good answer. And then God replies, Zusha, when you die, I'm not going to ask you why you weren't more like Moses. I'm going to ask you why you weren't more like Zusha. By returning to ourselves, we internalize our assessments of our life and our definitions of what success really looks like. You are not meant to be Moses. You are meant to be you. Finally, I think returning to ourselves can help us navigate this deeply polarized moment that we're living in. I don't know about you, but I've spent a lot of time this last year navigating relationships that have been strained by disagreements. I've even spiraled into bigger questions about humanity. How did we as a country re-elect this president? What does it mean that he got the majority of our votes? How is it that I see the world so differently from others? And most importantly, what can I do to convince them to see things my way? I think returning to myself in this context, it means letting go of the desire for an agreed upon reality. It's a weird thing for me to say as a rabbi, and I would like the record to show I still do believe in right and wrong. But the truth is, I have yet to successfully change someone's perspectives on these core issues. And as a long-term strategy, it feels misguided and doomed to fail. I think the return to self might help us disagree better by letting go of the need to fix or correct others. The return to self is a return to I statements, to sharing our experience, our reactions, our feelings without needing to convince anyone else of our perspective. It's a move away from arguing, from debating, from talking points and takedowns. It is tragically rare these days to see two people have a conversation in which they disagree and where they can name that disagreement accurately and fairly. More often, I think our disagreements devolve into villainizing, belittling, mischaracterizing the other. But the Jewish approach to disagreement is different. Modeled by Rabbi Hillel almost 2,000 years ago, the Jewish way to disagree is to first state the other's opinion in a way that they feel seen and understood, and only then to state your own. The disagreement does not need to be resolved, and the friendship does not need to end. It's clear that there are many different ways of seeing this world that we're living in. The more we can root ourselves in our own way of seeing the world, the more we might be able to tolerate sharing that world with others who see things differently. My hope for us this Yom Kippur and in this year ahead is that we can make a little bit of time to return to ourselves. I believe it will be good for us, and I believe it will be good for the world. Now, I know this focus on self might sound like the opposite of religion, which we traditionally understand as being focused on God. But I see God as within each of us. And as the Nativot Shalom, a Hasidic rabbi from the previous century, explains, each of us are divinely unique. He writes, from the day of creation and onward, no person is like any other. So even if you're feeling lost or disconnected from yourself, especially if you're feeling lost or disconnected from yourself, try to spend a little time getting back in touch with you and that divine spark that makes you you. Find 15 minutes a day. If that's too much, find 5 minutes a day. Dedicated time to be with just yourself. No books or magazines, no screens, no one else, just you alone in the innermost sanctuary of your heart, mind, and soul. See what you discover. It's a lonely thing to do, but it's the only thing to do. Shana Tova, wishing you a meaningful Yom Kippur ahead.